The gods of the Lyran Dominion did not speak to the godless. That was the doctrine ancient and crystalline upheld by the venerant synod for over 11,000 star cycles. Their word was law, and that law shaped the stars of 67 systems, echoed in the obsidian temples of Hervale, carved into the hollowed moons of Brelier, and sung by the high chorus on the floating sanctuaries above Azukar Prime. The Lyran had no kings, no elected tribunals. Only the priests whose communion with the ascendant pantheon made them sovereign above all. And yet from the third-tier archives of the synod, deep within the vaulted chambers of restricted historical observance, a name had begun to circulate in anxious whispers. Humans, not in reverence, not in fear, in disdain, in disbelief, in slow-burning heretical fury. For the humans had no pantheon, no prayer structures, no sacramental order. They arrived without liturgy, without sacred emblems, bearing only machines and bold intentions. When first contact came, it was not through grandeur but through necessity. The world of Tharixtel, one of the lesser Lyran outer spheres, orbited a dying sun. Once a fertile jewel of cultivated plasma fields and magnetized orchards, Tharixtel was now locked in climatic ruin. The sun's magnetic poles had destabilized, birthing unpredictable solar flares that ignited the upper atmosphere. Entire zones became uninhabitable within days, crops failed, plasma converters fell silent, and despite their devotion, the priests received no divine answer. The Dominion dispatched envoys to plead before the High Synod for intervention, yet the will of the ascendants was inscrutable. The priests fasted, they chanted, they burned 27 oracles in ceremonial ascension. No vision came. So when an automated transmission burst through the static veil, a simple message in trade tongue promising aid and asking nothing in return, it was regarded as a blasphemous test. The source, a Terran civilian rescue flotilla operating under the United Earth Concord's colonial relief mandate. It had been monitoring fringe distress signals from the galactic periphery. It had found Tharixtel. The Synod denied them formal entry. The humans came anyway. 5 ships, small, aged, and dark compared to the radiant glory of Lyran Templecraft. But they came fast, adapting to Lyran orbital code faster than predicted, deploying a network of synchronized orbital mirrors to reflect and redirect the worst of the flare activity. It was not enough to halt the collapse, but it bought time. Time to evacuate the outer sanctuaries, time to shield the central temples, time to breathe. They wore no veils, these humans, no masks to hide the soul. Their eyes were stark and mortal, their tools loud and ungraceful. They never knelt, never invoked. But when the eastern shield array failed and the outer sunstorms breached the 5th sanctuary dome, it was the humans who walked into the fire and rebalanced the harmonics by hand. To the venerant synod, it was a provocation of cosmic order. To the people of Tharixtel, it was salvation. And among the human crew, one name rose above the others. Commander Arden Kai. A field engineer by title, a Terran-born war orphan raised in orbitals around Saturn. Her record was uneven, commendations for field bravery interspersed with disciplinary notes for insubordination. But in the chaos of Tharixtel, her instincts saved lives, Lyran and Terran alike. She never asked permission, she acted. Kai did not speak much to the Lyran priests. When they first confronted her, hovering a meter above the ground, arms adorned with the flame script tattoos of the Ascendant Order, she listened without deference. "You are godless," they told her, "and this is a test of faith." Kai looked at the scorched horizon, at the cracking shield domes beyond the sacred walls. "If this is a test," she said, "then someone needs to start answering the questions." It was not a declaration, it was not a threat. It was a simple sentence delivered in the tone of someone who had seen too many people die waiting for divine intervention. The priest who spoke to her, a young venerant named Overin Tal, was so stunned by her reply that he later submitted a formal heresy report to the synod. The report was ignored. Events were accelerating too quickly. Each day, the solar flares grew stronger. The orbital reflectors began failing. Human engineers worked in rotating shifts, sleeping in the guts of their own ships, patching Lyran tech with carbon fiber polymers and quantum gel infusions never meant to function together. Somehow it worked. The Lyran, rigid in their ways, watched in silence as the humans improvised, broke rules, redefined survival. It was disorder, it was undignified, and it kept Tharixtel alive. But survival is never enough. When the sun split, it was not immediate. The solar monitors warned of polarity collapse. The humans warned of a corona inversion event, a rare solar phenomenon that would wipe atmospheric stabilizers and render the planet permanently uninhabitable. The synod dismissed it as blasphemy, punishment for allowing heretics to meddle in divine energies. Commander Kai requested permission to launch a stellar anchor drill into the planetary core to realign Tharixtel's magnetic harmonics and stabilize the sun's influence. It was a desperate gamble. One miscalculation would fracture the mantle and doom the entire world. The priests called it madness, Overental called it sacrilege. You would violate the living blood of a sanctified world, he shouted before the temple of resonant truth, and invite the wrath of the ascendants. Kai looked at the crowd, thousands of Lyran citizens, cloaked in fear and ash, and said, "If your gods are watching, tell them I'm trying to keep their house from burning." It was the first time the people of Tharixtel applauded a human. But the priests were not done resisting. As Kai and her crew prepared the descent to the drill site, located beneath the sacred ice spires of the Nierales range, the Synod invoked the right of non-intervention. Any further interference by offworlders would be considered an act of war. A war the humans could not win. The Earth conquered had no military presence in Lyran space. No backup, no ships of the line, just 5 relief vessels, a handful of engineers, and one commander with a taste for risk. Kai grounded her ships. Then, without authorization, she took the last functioning drill core and descended into the mountains alone. No escort, no comms, just a beacon signal blinking steadily behind her like a heartbeat. The Lyran said nothing. The Synod offered no response. Overental watched from the temple steps as the human vanished into the storm-churned white, walking into the most sacred ground his people had ever known, carrying a machine forged in unbelief. For the first time in centuries, a priest did not know whether to pray or follow. The sun screamed. The ground shook. And Commander Kai was gone. The tremors from the Nierales range echoed across Tharixtel like the voice of a dying titan. Cities on the lowlands felt it first, vibrations pulsing through the sublayer infrastructure, setting off old seismic alarms that hadn't triggered in generations. The sky turned a violent shade of vermilion. Solar flares arced in sharp, jagged bursts above the stratosphere, clawing at the weakened shield web. And still no word from Commander Kai. Human command protocols dictated a blackout during core operations, especially when operating in religiously restricted zones without planetary clearance. But those protocols were never meant to be obeyed in isolation. They assumed support, oversight, rescue options. Kai had none of those. Above the planet in low orbit aboard the UCS Ardent Dawn, her second-in-command Lieutenant Reyes Sulo was pacing the bridge, eyes locked on a flickering readout. The beacon was still active, transmitting a telemetry pulse that said Kai was alive and descending, but the signal was erratic. The core magnetic harmonics were distorting everything. Sulo slammed a fist on the console. She went alone to keep us out of a diplomatic war. Now she's buried in a tectonic knife pit while we sit up here wringing our hands. The Lyran official assigned to the ship, a liaison named Vayan Tresh, spoke in that cold, slow cadence that all the priests used. Your commander entered a sacred region forbidden by divine edict. Intervention now would multiply the heresy. If she dies, her judgment rests with the Pantheon. Reyes stepped toward the liaison, voice quiet and flat. If she dies, it'll be because she went into your storm to save a world that your gods abandoned. Tresh did not respond. On the surface, chaos was brewing. Tharixtel's capital, Vanyarasil, was on edge. Hundreds of thousands had gathered near the central sanctum plaza. The word had spread too quickly to be contained. The Synod's veil of secrecy was unraveling. News of the humans' descent into the sacred range had electrified the civilian population. In the outer districts, banners of the ascendant still flew. But closer to the temples, the crowd's eyes were drawn not to the sky, but to the mountain line. To where the storm churned brightest. In the eastern spire cloister, venerant Overental stared into a relic bowl of burning sands, seeking visions. For hours he had knelt in isolation, fingers trembling with each failed invocation. There was no answer, no vision, just heat and silence and the echo of Kai's final words. If your gods are watching, tell them I'm trying to keep their house from burning. He rose, his robes soaked in sweat, his mind fractured by doubt. He had always believed in the silence of the gods. That faith was obedience, and obedience meant purity. But now his prayers sounded like denial, like avoidance. Overin exited the sanctum and found the plaza below filled with citizens watching the storm. One of them, a child no older than 10, held up a crude drawing on a thin sheet of solar cloth. It showed a woman standing before a cracking mountain, light erupting from her chest. No iconography of the Pantheon, no sacred glyphs. Just a Terran in the storm. Far beneath the surface of Tharixtel, Arden Kai stood before the heart of the world. The core chamber of the Nierales range was not natural, not entirely. Human sensors had revealed strange harmonics pulsing within the geological strata, patterns too regular to be seismic. She'd suspected artificial influence. but now, standing before a cathedral-sized chamber of fused crystal and obsidian veins, she realized the truth was far older and more impossible than she had imagined. This was a construct, buried millennia ago, woven into the tectonic fabric of the world. It radiated both heat and song, deep, harmonic pulses that reminded Kai of whales under Europa's ice. The drill rig, battered from its descent, still stood operational. She calibrated the magnetic anchor, tuning it to the solar inversion frequency calculated by Earth's AI cores. If she was right, the harmonic pulse would stabilize the sun's magnetic lashes, preventing further corona breaches. If she was wrong, the pulse would ignite a cascade chain through the planet's mantle, tearing it apart in under 8 minutes. No backup, no simulations, just raw instinct and planetary triage. Kai looked up at the chamber walls. Glyphs, unlike any Terran or Lyran script, were faintly illuminated by the resonance. Alien but deliberate, as if someone had been here before, long before the Lyran called this world sacred. She exhaled once sharply and activated the drill's quantum pulse core. The chamber exploded with light. Above, the sky over Tharixtel ruptured. A wave of anti-magnetic energy surged outward in all directions like a tidal crash of invisible force. The flare storm halted mid-arc, shield webs flared and then resynced. The atmospheric stabilizers, long dormant, reawakened with shuddering power. On the ardent dawn, all monitors went black, then green, stable. For the first time in 23 days, the planet was quiet. The Lyran priests, scattered in high sanctums across the capital and surrounding cities, felt it like a blow to the soul. The storm was gone, their rituals had failed, but the human had succeeded. No word from Kai. No signal. Just silence. 3 days passed. The rescue mission was conducted in secret. Sulo took one shuttle down under darkness, accompanied by 2 engineers and a single Lyran civilian volunteer, over in Tal. Tal had requested to join without explanation, not as a venerant, just as a witness. They reached the drill site through ash and glass. The mountain was split, partially collapsed inwards, the entire peak reshaped. Deep within the ruins of the ancient chamber, the team found remnants of the pulse rig melted to slag. And in the center, buried under crystalline rubble, was a human body. Kai's left leg was shattered, her suit's environmental seals were compromised. One arm was gone, torn away at the shoulder, but her body was curled protectively around the stabilizer node, shielding it from debris. She'd triggered the anchor manually. The rig's automation had failed, it should have detonated. She must have reprogrammed it during the final seconds, manually tuning the pulse. She had died holding the device in place. Ray's knelt beside her, silent. Tal did not speak either. He simply removed his outer robe, folded it once, and placed it over her broken body. Later, when the shuttle emerged from the mountain and the people of Vanyarasel saw the human's body being carried in solemn procession through the streets, they did not cheer. They fell silent. The Ascendants had never answered. But a godless one had. They buried her beneath the Niarali's sky. Not in Terran fashion, not with alloy and data markers or drifting orbital urns, but in silence. No gravestone, no anthem, just a single obelisk of translucent obsidian carved from the same crystal she had died beneath. It stood alone at the edge of the breach, where the storm first ended, where the mountain cracked, where the sun ceased its attack. The Lyran called it the Threshold of Flame. No one instructed them to build it, no decree came from the Synod, the people did it on their own. Stonemasons and plasma forgers worked side by side, fusing ancient form with Terran simplicity. No symbol of the Ascendants was etched upon it, no priest consecrated the stone. But each morning, as Tharixtel's pale light crawled across the sky, thousands gathered before it, kneeling not in worship, but in memory. Commander Arden Kai's name, in both Earth Standard and Lyran glyphs, was etched into the core. She stood in the fire and held back the end. Over in Tal watched from the edges of the crowd, his venerant robes gone, replaced by the gray utilities of a planetary worker. He spoke rarely now, mostly to children and the sick. He had not returned to the Synod chambers, not since he descended into the mountain and saw with his own eyes the chamber of glass and pulse. He had not prayed since. But he remembered her voice. The Lyran Synod did not collapse overnight, empires never do, but the fracture line had already formed. In the central sanctum of the High Temple of Korelma, the archpriests convened behind sealed walls. Recordings from the planetary surface were reviewed. The magnetic readings, the seismic pulses, the pre-event flare patterns, they all confirmed one thing: a miracle had occurred. But it was wrought not by the will of the ascendants. By a human, a godless one. For some that was a paradox, for others a betrayal. The synod's ruling statement came 5 days after the burial. The survival of Tharixtel is a blessing from the pantheon permitted through mortal hands. The human known as Kai was an instrument, her death a proof of divine orchestration. All glory remains with the ascendants. But outside the sanctums, the citizens of Tharixtel were no longer listening. When the statement was transmitted across the capital, thousands turned their backs on the temple spires. Children refused to repeat the daily ascendant recital. Some even began wearing patches, circular black and silver cloth marks modeled after the Terran mission emblem, not as rebellion, as remembrance. The priests called it contamination. The synod dispatched a correction envoy. It never arrived. The ship was grounded by a coalition of planetary stewards and civilian monitors who cited environmental concerns near the Reformation zone. It was a technicality, a legal maneuver, but the message was clear. We are not yours anymore. In orbit, the UCS Ardent Dawn prepared to depart. Its mission had ended. Relief protocols required withdrawal after stability was confirmed. The surviving crew were scheduled for reassignment to the Anderos Rim, a fungal outbreak on a frontier colony, but not all would go. Reyes Sulo stood at the primary viewport, staring at the planet below at the break in the Niarali's range. She could still hear Kai's voice in her head, the way she used to talk about Terran cities not as places but as people. Worlds are alive, Reyes, she once said, half-drunk on recycled oxygen in a maintenance tunnel. They remember who loves them. Before departure, Reyes submitted one final request to Concord Command. Recommend establishment of a permanent Earth-Concord liaison post on Tharixtel, not as diplomats, as neighbors. No reply came for 6 days. When it arrived, it was a single line from Admiral Naren Sayeg, commander of Concord's Central Colonial Authority. Approved, and send someone who knows how to listen. In the deep sky beyond the rim of the Lyran Dominion, other eyes were watching. Not human, not Lyran. The race known only as the Zavrok had observed the solar anomaly from their Black Spire vessels, not out of curiosity, out of concern. Zavrok science was built upon predictive entropy, the idea that all systems collapse into higher order through calculated destruction. They had modeled the collapse of the Lyran pantheon for centuries, expected it to take another 3 generations. The human event changed everything. Commander Kai's intervention had not merely saved a world. It had accelerated a cultural fracture in one of the oldest religious empires in the known galaxy. To the Zavrok, this was deviation. Deviation required containment. They would not act yet, but their archives now listed Homo sapiens under a new classification. Cultural catalyst species, Vector Tier 1, unaligned, unpredictable. And in the councils of the greater galactic powers, the Xanthic Triumvirate, the Kael'nu High Choir, even the silent voyants of the hollow stars, the name human was no longer irrelevant. They had defied divine order without worship, rewritten fate through action. And one of them had died not for conquest, not for glory, but for strangers whose gods called her nothing. Now those strangers mourned her more than their own saints. That was dangerous. That was power. Weeks passed. On Tharixtel, the first rain in a decade fell. The storm walls parted, the rewilding protocols initiated. Lyran and Terran techs worked side by side, reactivating old-growth pods, seeding nutrient arches across the outer domes. A new language emerged, half trade tongue, half local dialect, laced with Terran slang. Children began learning Earth Standard as a second tongue. No one forced it. They simply wanted to understand the woman whose voice had once said, "If your gods are watching, tell them I'm trying to keep their house from burning." And then did exactly that. In the mountain near the place of the obelisk, a small structure was built. Round, low, and quiet, no religious iconography, just a place for those who wanted to sit. Some called it the listening house. Overin Tal lived there now. He did not wear robes, he did not preach. But when people came to ask what happened in the mountain, what he saw, what he heard, he would tell them one story. About a woman who came with no gods, and left as a fire that even heaven could not silence. On the 9th orbit of Tharixtel after the flare event, a new signal pulsed from the listening house. It was not loud, it did not radiate like a beacon. It threaded itself into the solar winds, quiet and deliberate, encoded in a low-band whisper that no Lyran array would have detected on its own. But the UCS Ardent Dawn, now rechristened as the Kai Threshold and stationed in system under a permanent humanitarian charter, caught it instantly. It was Earth standard, but wrapped in modulation patterns far beyond Terran encryption. The message was simple. Observation confirmed, influence real, boundary breached, the Child of Fire remembers. Rei Sulo received it alone. She sat at the comms desk long after the crew rotation had switched. The words didn't match any distress protocols or known diplomatic headers, but the source signature, they traced it back to deep orbit, a satellite array embedded in the fractured debris ring above Tharixtel's sister moon. A relay no human had ever installed. Something had been watching, and it had chosen now to speak. In the Dominion core far from Tharixtel, the Synod burned its own records. Not metaphorically, literally. In vaults beneath the Temple of Starbun Law, ancient texts were ignited in purifying flame, scrolls, quantum crystals, voice stone relics. Anything that could suggest a moment where divine silence had been challenged, where a non-believer had filled the void. The priests called it a recalibration of narrative, a restoration of purity. But outside the sacred halls, stories flowed like water. Pilgrims now traveled to Tharixtel not to reaffirm faith, but to question it. They stood before the obelisk and touched the stone. Some said they heard music, others said they heard nothing at all, but they kept coming. And where once stood temples of prayer, new assemblies formed. They called themselves the Flameholders. Not a religion, not a rebellion, just memory given voice. They did not ask others to believe in humans. They asked others to believe in courage without reward, in sacrifice without dogma. In doing rather than waiting. The Synod denounced them. But the Synod's voice grew quieter each season. Far beyond the Dominion, Earth listened. The Conquered Council had convened twice over the Tharixtel incident. Both times, the security chairs warned against overreach. Earth was still small, still vulnerable. Official policy was non-provocation. But there were others off-book. In the Cold Space Operations wing of Conquered Intelligence, deep beneath the glacier facilities of the Callisto Enclave, Kai's file had been reopened. Not for her death, for the reaction to it. Intel matrices showed that since her sacrifice, 13 minor civilizations had altered their diplomatic stances toward Earth. 3 had initiated cultural exchanges. 1, the Keldihar Empire, long known for its theological rigidity, had secretly requested access to Terran disaster response protocols. Commander Arden Kai had become a myth. And myths were more dangerous than armies. In the unseen reach, the Zavrak High Chorus met in spectral communion. The decision was unanimous. Humanity's influence had escaped containment. Their culture, their refusal of galactic tradition, their emergence as a narrative force, it all pointed to one conclusion. The humans would reshape belief across the quadrant. Not through conquest, through example. They could not be stopped, but they could be understood. So the Zavrak did something they had not done in over 4,000 years. They made contact. A single emissary designed not as a weapon but as a question was dispatched to the outer edge of conquered space. It bore no weapons, only memory, and a symbol. A fire held in human hands. On Tharixtel, the first interspecies school was completed. It was built from the same obsidian glass found in the heart chamber of the mountain. Students from both Lyran and Earth attended. No one was required to pray. But every morning, the class began with one ritual. A reading of Kai's final transmission, recovered from her suit's audio log and played only once per day. Systems failing, pulse alignment set. I can hold the core for 15 more seconds, maybe less. If this holds, tell them it wasn't for belief. It was because no one else was coming and someone had to. Someone always has to. Outside, beneath the ash-wind-blown flags, a new mural was painted across the school's curved wall. It showed no face, just a human silhouette framed by a burning sky holding back the sun with bare hands. The caption read, "She did not kneel, she stood." But not all among the Lyran were silent. One priest, Exarch Velmid Orales, had fled the Synod purge and sought refuge among exiles on the night world of Helveridin. There, in frost catacombs beneath ice-locked seas, he began compiling an alternate record of what had truly happened on Tharixtel. He called it the Book of the Silent Flame. In it he wrote, "We waited for a sign. The sign came, but it did not speak in our language. It did not come robed in light. It came in broken limbs and burning skin. It came doing what our prayers never could. And we denied it because it did not kneel. We denied her." Copies of the book spread like wildfire, encrypted and whispered, shared hand to hand through shadow networks. It was declared heresy. Possession was punishable by void exile. But copies kept appearing, on outer moons, on drifting colony ships, even inside synod chambers. One line from the book was carved into the hull of a civilian freighter that docked at the Lyran capital. "When faith becomes stillness, it is the godless who move the world." And somewhere in the deep black between systems, something else stirred. Not Zavrak, not Lyran, not human. An ancient mind. It had been watching since long before the Ascendants, before the Conquered, before the first sentience lit its own sky. It had seen empires rise and turn to salt. It had seen gods forged, worshipped, and buried. And now, for the first time in its long silence, it whispered to itself. The pattern has changed. It began with echoes. Not sound, not speech, but temporal dissonances cascading through the lattice space of old wormway relics scattered across the broken verge. Ships passing through reported flickering visions, shadows of a woman standing in solar fire, her face unreadable, her hands stretched wide as if holding back a collapsing universe. Most dismissed them as magnetic hallucinations, side effects of older jump architecture, but not all. One such ship, a conquered archival vessel named Sagan's Reach, captured a full 15-second recording of the anomaly on transit through the island fold. The sequence was analyzed across 6 science academies, 2 AI clusters, and by the Lyran exile scholar Velmid Orales himself. The conclusion was inconceivable. The anomaly bore Commander Arden Kai's biosignature. Back on Tharixtel, the Flameholders did not need scientific confirmation. To them she had never left. Her sacrifice had become part of the world, etched into tectonic song, embedded in the stillness between solar pulses. Their gatherings expanded, not to preach, to act. They restored the storm-scarred domes of the southern continent, rebuilt aqueducts long lost to the flare surge, and opened passage to wandering species barred by the Synod. Their emblem, a flame set inside a handprint, began to appear far beyond Tharixtel. On the mining barges of the Yelva Drift, on the medical hubs of the Rim March, in murals on dust-wind-swept Mars. Even among Terran soldiers stationed along the conflict borders with the Grail Confederacy, the flame-in-hand insignia surfaced. Not as allegiance to any state, but as reminder that salvation once came from someone no one expected, and that it could again. The Zavrak emissary arrived at the conquered assembly in the form of a living monolith, 12 meters tall, black as frozen vacuum, carved with fractal veins that pulsed in ultraviolet. It made no demands. It spoke in harmonics translated through a chorus of suspended resonance translators. Its message was simple. You are disruption made flesh. Your irreverence creates evolution. We will not contain you. We will learn. The council chamber fell into stunned silence. After the Zavrak departed, Admiral Sayeg ordered the full declassification of all data related to Kai's death. Public access terminals across conquered territory lit up with records, logs, transmissions, every heartbeat and hesitation of her final moments laid bare. But most watched only one thing, the audio log. The last few seconds as she held the core alone. And as it played, millions of humans and non-humans alike stood in silent recognition. Not of religion, not of conquest. Of choice. In time, the Synod fractured. First into 2 orders, those who clung to the Ascendants and those who accepted Kai's act as divine in its own right. Then into dozens more. The Dominion lost worlds not in war but in meaning. Faith became uncertain. Power shifted to governors and citizens who remembered the fire in the sky, the way the mountains split, the way the sun stopped screaming. Some still called her heretic, others savior. But everyone knew her name now. Children on Brelier played Hold the Core, pretending to descend into the planet's heart. Lyran sculptors etched her silhouette into the sides of volcanic stone. Terran Hollow archives declared her the first of the unknown path. But the truth was quieter. She had been one woman. Tired, injured, angry. And she had chosen to save strangers who would never understand her. Decades passed. Tharixtel bloomed. Its skies stabilized, its forests regrew in new, untamed patterns. A species of glimmering insects long thought extinct returned to the highlands. The cities became open. No more sacred walls, no more untouchable zones. And at the edge of the Niarali's breach, the obelisk remained. No guards, no tourists, just quiet. Sometimes travelers would leave tokens. Not religious offerings, just things. A worn boot, a broken drill bit, a strip of fabric. One day a child, half lion, half Terran, placed a stone there. The child turned to her guardian and asked, why did she do it? The answer was not rehearsed. The guardian simply said, because no one else would. Far across the stars, beyond known space, the ancient mind that had once whispered of change awoke fully. It had watched for eons, observed cycles rise and collapse, seen civilizations burn out by their own inertia. But this was different. A civilization that didn't wait for fate. A species that made itself the answer. Humanity had become a paradox, small but vast, godless but selfless, chaotic but transformative. The ancient mind spoke not in words but in gravity. In the pulse of forming stars. In the spinning edges of dark matter where reality grew thin. And its message echoed in every corner of the galaxy. The godless have become the fire, and all things must burn or change. That was how it began. Not with an empire. Not with a fleet. Not with a god. But with one human. Standing alone at the end of the world. Holding back the sun,